You're listening to She's the Business podcast.
Does the mere thought of what other people think of you stop you from taking action, stop you from doing so many things? Maybe you're identifying yourself as a people pleaser, and that right now it could be holding you back from what you want to be doing in your life. Well, if that's sounding like you, then stay tuned for today's episode, because we're diving into the topic of people pleasing and how you can start to take control of that in your life so that you can do, say, and be just the confident person without the ties of that, without the fear of judgment from others holding you back. Stay tuned.
Hi, I'm your host, Jessica Osborne, and in my 23 years of business and marketing, I've built many brands to become multi-billion-dollar companies. And just in the last 10 years, I've built 2 online businesses of my own from my dining room table with 2 little babies running around at my feet. I've made it my mission to inspire you to get out of your own way and become the successful business owner who's living the lifestyle you really desire without all the hustle. This is She's the Business podcast, made by women for women. This is your weekly dose of motivation and inspiration.
Now, if I asked you, do you know who your ideal customer is? More than likely, you're going to answer, yes, of course I do. Or at least I know enough about them to market to them. Or do you? You see, the number one reason why most audiences aren't converting into buyers, or even if you're having trouble building an audience in the first place, is simply because you haven't gone deep enough to understand who it is exactly who you're speaking to. There's no connection being made there, and therefore those people aren't taking that next step. They're not connecting with you, they're not connecting through to become your clients. It's not so much about who they are as a person, who you might see, but more what is actually going on inside their head. What are those questions running on repeat inside their minds? What is it that they're feeling so stuck and frustrated about? And really, why aren't they able to shift themselves out of that place? Now, these are just some of the amazing questions that I get you to explore inside my brand new Customer Avatar Worksheet. I've called it the ultimate Customer Avatar Worksheet because you will never, ever have seen one like this before. It is so much about what's going on in the mind, with a couple of questions just to help you get the visual profile of who it is you're speaking to as well. But clearly, it is their thoughts and the way to connect to their thoughts that shifts somebody from being just a person out there in the market into being somebody who's an active fan, a member of your audience, and not only that, but also a buyer. And that takes deeper connection than what most people are prepared to do. So if you're prepared to go that additional step to get really deep and meaningful with your ideal customer, then head over to my website and download this free worksheet right now, and you can get started. It's at jessicaosborne.com/customer-avatar. I've got the link for you here in the show notes, so you can hop straight over there and just get it, download it, and let me know how you get on. Like, how did you find this exercise that I take you through? Because I guarantee you are going to learn more than one brand new thing about your ideal customer that you never knew before. So enjoy, good luck. I hope you love it as much as I do. My very special guest today, I'm so excited to bring her on the podcast. She's a new member of Business Jam, and she's a psychologist, clinical psychologist that works with leaders all around the world, high-ranking CEOs, all sorts of people. And she specializes in women's embodiment and particularly around people pleasing. Now, Eloise Tomkins is what she call an embodiment coach. So she brings to her coaching practice her extensive knowledge of psychology and helping women develop that unshakable self-confidence so that they can, speak up, quit caring what other people think. She challenges patriarchy in a male-dominated world, which female leaders really feel, with her bold, unapologetic voice. And Eloise is an absolute gem. She understands
people pleasing to a fine art, because she calls herself a recovered people pleaser. And she's also going to share with us why it's not about necessarily recovering from it and getting rid of that part of you, because it's still there. It's still always going to be a part of you, but it's really learning how to take control of it, how to take the lead in your life, and have that people pleasing part of you actually turn into a benefit rather than a disadvantage. So I know you're going to absolutely love this episode and everything Eloise has to share with us today. So without further ado, let me play the interview for you. Okay, and I'm here with Eloise Tomkins. I'm so excited to talk to you, Eloise. She is the founder of the She series, and today we're going to be deep diving into the topic all around people pleasing and why this is something that you can actually use to your advantage. It's not a bad thing like we so often hear in online business. So welcome, Eloise. Really great to have you here on the podcast with me today.
Thanks so much, Jess. I'm so excited to be here. This is definitely my jam and something I love talking about.
Yeah.
So I'm super happy.
Oh, amazing. And just before we get into it, because I know both, we're just like, I can tell we're dying to talk about this topic. It's something that so many women, I think, really relate to and, identify with. But can you tell us just first a little bit about who you are, what you do in your business, and how you got to being here today as the founder of the She series?
Yeah, so I am a psychologist by trade, and realized that a lot of women that I would work with would often come in and talk about people pleasing and how they really struggled with this in their life. And I think that what I recognized is that I was working with a lot of professional women, and it's something that women would be experiencing quite a lot. And I realized that I could work with women one-to-one, which meant that my services would be limited. And there are so many women where people-pleasing affects. So I thought that if I was able to create a community where I could reach more women, that would be amazing, because then we'd be able to get this like kind of collective of women who are able to be really confident, really assertive, really strong, nice people, without kind of sacrificing that, to be able to pass that on to future generations themselves. So really something I'm really passionate about, helping as many women as I can.
I love that. Amazing. And so you've been a psychologist for how many years? That's been sort of like your job before you started this business?
So I've been working in the psychology space for around 10 years. So quite a bit of experience under belt. And I kind of love all that mindset stuff. And this is throughout my experience, this is something that I've kept coming back to. I really love understanding, because I think for me, working with people pleasing, I've been really able to see the links to how women have been raised, how we've been conditioned, and how this then brings, or how this ties into the concept of people pleasing. And so they're like feminism, the patriarchy, they're all topics that kind of link into it and spark my interest. And it just was kind of a natural ebb and flow to kind of move into this space.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, can't wait to get into this. So let's start off with, what do you define as people pleasing? Like how would we identify or know that we are in that category of a people pleaser?
Yeah, it kind of all comes down to our motivation or our intent behind our behavior. And I think a lot of women who are people pleasers do so because they're seeking approval from somebody else, or there's a fear of rejection, fear that whether it's a friend, partner, or even a boss, is something bad is going to happen to them. And so the motivation behind people pleasing is very much around, what can I do to prevent this negative thing from happening to me? Whereas I think being kind or being a genuine friend, not to say that people pleasers aren't genuine, because we absolutely are. I'm a self-confessed people pleaser, or recovered people pleaser over here. So I think that's also a reason that I stepped into this space. But there's that real fear, there's that real anxiety around wanting to just be liked by people.
Yeah.
Which is where it kind of stems from.
And so why is this something that is, felt by so many people or so widespread? Where does it all come from?
That's a really good question. And yeah, it stems back to, in my opinion, like how we're raised. As soon as we find out the gender of a baby, it's automatically assumed, okay, we're going to buy pink toys because it's a girl. We're going to paint the room pink. We're going to buy dolls. And it's very much fed into this narrative around, okay, well, I'm going to treat this person, treat this woman, or treat this young girl in a particular way, which sets us up for a particular life trajectory. Gosh, that's a hard word to say. And it's interesting because a lot of women that I work with have had experiences where they've been told to hug a family member that they don't want to hug. They've been told that they need to do things that they don't want to do. That, I remember wearing these ugly white dresses with, blue socks and little bows on them when I was a kid, which I absolutely hated. And it's things like that, and it's hard as kids because we don't have a lot of autonomy, and our parents are responsible for making a lot of choices for us. At the same time, those choices are very much based on our gender and not on who we truly are. And when we try and kind of establish who we are, we're very often shut down, which disconnects us from how we feel in our bodies. And I think that's really tricky for women because that then sets us up to develop these beliefs that other people's needs are more important than our own. It's more important to listen to our parents than listen to ourselves. And again, it's hard with kids because on some levels that's important, absolutely. But when it kind of comes to not trusting our body as children, that then filters into how we act as adults or how we kind of go about the world as adults. And that's kind of where that people-pleasing behavior really stems from.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we are adults and out in the adult world, what do you see, the people pleasers? You mentioned that you work a lot with professional women who have come in and, they're experiencing some things that they're not liking in their life. And you're seeing that it's tying it back to this inbuilt way of being, like that they just without even realizing, I'm guessing it's subconscious, right? Got to the point where it's so ingrained and inbuilt that it's subconscious people pleasing. What are some of the kind of things that you see them doing as people pleasers where they're even, maybe they recognize themselves and they're frustrated by it, but they don't know how to stop it?
Yeah, and it's interesting, like as you were saying, that it is very much subconscious. A lot of the time we don't recognize, again, self-confessed recovered people pleaser over here, or recovering, because I think it's an ongoing journey. I work with professional women. Like recently I was working with a woman who had an experience where they were finding it really difficult to have a conversation with a colleague. And kind of diving deep into that, we were able to kind of tease that back to early childhood experiences that were kind of replicating the relationship that she had with her father, which is where she felt fearful, kind of being able to express how she felt, because in that situation, Dad would get angry. And that's kind of situations, I guess, that we tease apart with some of the women that I work with, because it comes out, like you said, so subconsciously in our adult life and has these kind of implications. Like in her case, it was kind of this 6 to 12 month drawn out issue in the workplace with this colleague that she was so fearful of getting wrong or having this colleague dislike her. But when we kind of pull back those layers almost, we could kind of see where it had come from. And by doing that, we were then able to have that conversation with the colleague and no longer kind of be afraid of doing that, because we could kind of piece together where that had come from for her.
Yeah. And like detach it from being like, just because you're having this conversation, it's not going to mean whatever the, I guess, perceived outcome might have been for her, that was, I don't know, going to, I'm not sure. What is it that we think? Actually, I've just suddenly realized, I'm like, I don't know. Like, it's like you're afraid of something's going to happen, right? We're afraid of not pleasing that person, but what actually is it that we're afraid of happening? Like, why is this fear there? Why are we afraid that if we are doing or saying something that isn't going to please the other person, it's like there's almost something that's habitual, but do we know what it is that we're afraid of and how that's going to come back to us?
Absolutely. And this stems into how our brain works, because our brain in those moments are perceiving threats. So we're kind of looking at situations, even though in the here and now it's not a threat. In the past, there were threats to our environment. So our nervous system is responding to that. Our nervous system is kind of saying, okay, well, this is kind of familiar. This situation that I'm experiencing in the here and now is really familiar. Our brain loves patterns. Our brain loves to follow patterns, even if they're not so helpful, which is why people pleasing becomes almost a habit, and it can be hard to kind of shift away from that. Because like you said, perception, it is about perception. If our brains have perceived that in the past as dangerous, or this is how we do things, this is how I've been shown how to respond in that situation, we're going to continue doing that, even if it's not particularly helpful for us when we're older, which is kind of why I see women that come to me, because they're like, oh, Ellie, this isn't helping me anymore. But I don't know why, because it used to help me in the past. And then sometimes there's a breaking point that gets reached. Like with this woman, for example, the point was, I haven't had to have a difficult conversation like this before. So I've been able to get by using the strategies that I've been able to use. And now I'm faced with this situation where it's pushing the system to the point of overwhelm. So crap, what do I do now? And that's when we kind of were able to delve into where some of these behaviors have been learned and how we can put some different strategies into place to choose or understand different ways of being able to respond.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because, as you're talking, there's so many situations that kind of come to mind as, as a child doing things so that you might make somebody happy. And I guess that the opposite of that is if you're not making them happy, then you're potentially making them angry, and you might not want to have somebody angry. So then you learn, oh, these are the good behaviors. And I think that there must be that sort of gray area, that boundary between, these are good behaviors as in for all humans and things that we should all be doing. And then there's sort of, it reaches into that place where actually you're maybe doing something that you wouldn't choose to do, but you're doing it because you think it'll just make somebody else happy. And I can see how that might extend then into the workplace. And gosh, I remember as a younger person writing some emails to a more senior marketing executive and having my boss say, oh, we might want to tone that one down a little bit. I think I was being quite outright with my opinion and telling them what we should do. I wasn't actually being, I don't know what the word was. I wasn't saying anything against them, but I was telling them, like, this is what we need to do. And he definitely wanted to tone down my email, probably because he was perceiving that the person at the other end might feel confronted by some young upstart like me telling them how they should be running their marketing, which is interesting, right? And I really learnt a lot of that, and then take it all on board. And then you think, so then what happens when we've been conditioned in so many different ways to always be in a place where we're towing the line or making somebody else feel happy or good or whatever it is? What tends to happen as this goes on in life? Because I can imagine then we become hyper sensitive to every situation that we're in. Like what tends to happen to the person who's the real people pleaser, and it becomes so habitual?
The words that I often hear are overwhelmed, stressed, anxious, burnt out, resentful, angry. And the interesting thing about that is there's this real sense of shame around experiencing a lot of those emotions, and shame for experiencing emotions. A lot of times people pleasers, because we have, as women, being conditioned to information that we get from our environment comes through our nervous system. And when we're getting all of this information in through our nervous system, it needs to go somewhere, right? And then not being able to effectively process them, or not knowing what they are in order to be able to process them. Essentially, like, our emotions communicate with us. They tell us, they motivate us to do different things. And when we've suppressed them for so long, which is often what happens with people pleasing, sometimes they can erupt and explode. And women will often talk to me about feeling like highly irritable. They feel like their emotions just out of control. They're kind of up and down, which makes sense. And I kind of liken it to, if you've got a beach ball and you're at the beach and you're trying to like squash this giant beach ball under the water, those really giant beach balls. I don't know if they have them anymore.
Yeah.
I
know what you mean. We definitely had them as kids.
Yeah, we definitely had them as kids. I'm like, have I seen them recently?
They must have become like a menace on the beach or something. Like too many kids are like punching or kicking these balls onto other people.
Who knows? But
I don't know.
The analogy that I use is like if you're kind of pushing that beach ball down underneath the water, a lot of energy to expend to kind of like keep that ball underneath the surface. And when you eventually move your arms and let that ball out of the water, it's going to like pop up and like go flying into the sky. And that's kind of what happens when people pleasers kind of keep their emotions underneath, because we're so busy trying to make sure that everyone else's needs are met. We're human though. We also have needs. We can't get past that. We can't avoid that. Like we're humans. It's a fundamental thing that we have. Putting other people ahead of ourselves does lead to resentment. And resentment kind of tells us that, okay, there's something happening here that we're not looking at ourselves. So yeah, I think I've gone off on a little bit of a tangent there, Jess.
No, it's good. I'm just sitting here drinking it all in. I think it's amazing because, like you said, there's this sort of internal shame. And then I think that's getting amplified at the moment because I'm not sure about you, but I go on to, social media feed, especially Instagram. I think it loves to be that place where, every few posts is someone telling you about something you're doing wrong. And I definitely see posts about, people pleasing in that world, in the world where you're either, I guess, professionals or you've got your own business. It can be seen as something everyone's telling you you've got to change. But, I've heard from you, while there are challenges and, if you can kind of let it get out of control with yourself, yes, it can be sending you maybe off down the path that you didn't want to be on, or maybe you're feeling stuck that you can't actually get where you want to go. So maybe we'll talk about how we can get out of that in a moment. But I think part of it is actually as well, I'd love to hear your thoughts on, how can we be kind to ourselves when we recognize that you're a people pleaser? What are some of the really great aspects about it that you can take forward with you? Because I'm sure it's not about trying to stamp it all out or totally get rid of it or change you completely, is it? It's sort of like, well, hey, you're this beautiful person that's grown into a beautiful adult, and you're obviously a lovely person because you're spending your whole life trying to please other people. So you're probably just absolutely wonderful for everybody else to be around. And it's just your own self that you're probably the one who's experiencing the angst of like, oh, I'm always making everyone else happy and I'm not myself happy. But what are some of the like wonderful parts of people pleasing? And then I'd love to hear, okay, when it's got to the point where it is being a problem for you in your life, and like, what can we do? How can we start to shift into a place where it's not a problem and bring all the beautiful parts with us?
Yeah, that's a really great point, because there are so many strengths to being somebody who does identify as a people pleaser. And you're right, so many of those Instagram posts like to tell us how to change, how to be better, how to do things differently. We're not good enough. And it all feeds into, I guess, the beliefs that deep down, which again, we may not consciously be aware of. And that's kind of some of the stuff I help guide people to, is understanding what some of those beliefs are so that we can be aware of those stories when they come up. Because I think drawing on the strengths requires us to be aware, and to be aware of what our own inner stories about us are. I've said this multiple times throughout this episode, like I am a recovering people pleaser. And I was saying to you earlier, Jess, like how some of my, like even with this podcast episode, how some of my own people pleasing thoughts were kicking in the background. Am I going to say the right thing? Are the listeners going to like what I have to say? Is Jessica going to like what I have to say? Is this interesting? Am I good enough? And but I'm aware of that. I even said to you, I was like, oh, there's my people pleasing story kicking in.
You were like, how long should I talk for? Because then I'm going to need to turn it off. And, I was like, look, I want you to just talk for as long as you want, like, say it from the heart. I don't want you to be thinking in your head, I need to be watching this so that I turn it off at the right time for Jess. And it was so funny because you did say, you're like, oh, there's my own people pleaser, popping up out of nowhere. And so it's this awareness that you're talking about, right? Like you're very much aware of where it's coming from now and can recognize what's happening.
Absolutely. And I think that developing awareness of that is kind of that first step of kind of being like, oh, okay, I do have this part of me that does want to please other people. And I do have this part of me that wants approval and love and validation and affection. And I also do realize where perhaps that's where some of my insecurities or anxiousness stems from. And being able to recognize that it is a part of us, that is not necessarily all of us, can be really helpful to, I guess, separate it from our identity or from being who we are. Because I meet women sometimes who are like, oh yeah, I'm a people pleaser and that's just who I am. And, if you're okay with that, that's okay. That's where you're at. I meet other people who are like, okay, I'm a people pleaser and I'm seeing that it's actually not benefiting me. And I want more. I want things to be different. And some of the strengths, I guess, that come from that is being able, like, people pleasers are lovely to be around because they want to, like you said, Jess, they want to please everyone. And who doesn't like that? Like people like being paid attention to, people like being listened to, people like that warmth that we can give. Generally, we're highly empathic. Generally, we are very thoughtful gift givers. If you've ever received a gift from somebody who's a people pleaser, they're generally pretty good gifts, because they're able to be in tune with what's going on around them.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so many strengths. They're also like very detail oriented in terms of being able to complete tasks, which is great for the workforce. But some of those things also come with some, I guess, disadvantages if you're not looking after your own needs. So for example, thinking of the detail orientation, like I know women that I've worked with who are very highly detail oriented, but will spend, stay up till 10, 11 o'clock at night, making sure that there's absolutely zero spelling errors, and which doesn't then leave balance for other things that are important to them. Or being highly empathic can sometimes mean that we're so attuned to other people's emotional responses that we feel like we absorb them ourselves. And being able to kind of find that balance of being able to be empathic, being detail oriented, being a fun person, a thoughtful gift giver, whilst at the same time kind of being able to separate or set boundaries and limits around ourselves can be really helpful in knowing what that limit is for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a great example as well, like staying up until 10 or 11 o'clock at night, making sure there's no spelling mistakes. I think that would have been me at some point in my life, because I grew up with an English teacher mother who was very explicit. She would pull out spelling mistakes out of the newspaper just for fun.
Just for fun.
She would see them everywhere. But I then, obviously going into marketing, and then I became, a manager, and I'd be signing off on all of this content. And so proofreading was just like part of my life for a while. And so I even became that. And I think it was like this part of, a bit of a pride thing. But where I see what you were talking about is, okay, what is it that we're staying up until 10 or 11 o'clock at night perfecting? And is it actually going to be seen as that valuable by whoever it is that we're doing it for? Like, is it necessary, or is there something that we're trying and putting so much energy and effort into that's then not going to be seen on that same level? And this is where it's like, wow, there's some really easy ones where we can be like, that isn't actually going to matter. Yes, it may be perfect, but is it going to change the world or the life if there's a mistake in it? As long as there's nothing critical, I'm sure it's going to be fine. We've all made mistakes. So, that was a really interesting example, I think, because it's, and what you said before, and I'd love you to talk a bit more of it, because I was like, I really get that, is separation of the people pleasing from your identity and it being just a part of you. So it's like, I love this concept because it's like you could almost give it a name, right? Here's my people pleasing, I don't know, people pleasing Mary or whoever. That's like this little part of me. And this is Mary, oh, Mary talking again, like the people pleaser in my head, the little chatterbox, and that's that voice. And then I might have my inner critic who's got a different name and my whatever else. And like you could kind of almost go, well, that's just them talking. And I get it. I get why they're saying that. And do I need to listen to that right now or do I not need to? And so I can really see how when you start to remove it from your actual identity, you can become more aware of it and maybe even manage it in a way where it can start to become more healthy. Is that kind of what you were
yeah, absolutely
talking about?
Absolutely. And I love that, you know, like that the way I kind of see it is it's almost like I kind of imagine it as this sounds really crazy, but I imagine it like as passengers on a bus, right? Like because we have lots of different parts to us that are kind of made up of all of our life experiences, and some of them are healthy, some of them are less helpful than others. They were these parts of us that we've kind of collected over the years have served us in some way. That's why they're there. They are there because they've been at some point in time helpful for us. They may not be necessarily always helpful for us now, but that doesn't mean they don't have good qualities to them as well. And it's kind of like people pleasing, or even that inner critic. Like the inner critic can be helpful sometimes to get us motivated, but can be unhelpful when it talks to us all day, every day. So
Totally.
I kind of liken it to what we want to get to is this idea of a healthy adult or a healthy self that can see all of the parts that kind of make us up, and including that people-pleasing part. But rather than allowing, kind of like what you were saying, you know, allowing that people-pleaser to drive the bus, to be the bus driver, we want the healthy adult to sit in the driver's seat and the people-pleaser to be a passenger who might be really annoying and loud sometimes. And they're not going to we can't send them off the bus. Like they're on the bus with us. They're coming on life's journey with us. We're stuck with them. Like we can't get rid of them. And we can use the strengths that people pleasing has and still let our healthy self sit in the driver's seat and make our decisions. So for example, going back to, you know, sitting up to 10, 11 o'clock at night, reading all of those mistakes, which I can also relate to that. And I think a lot of women can, right? Whether it's that or something else, we all have these things where we focus our attention on. And that says to me that perhaps we're letting that part of us ride or sit in the driver, make those decisions. Whereas at the end of the day, the healthy adult part of you is saying, does it really matter at the end of the day? Can I, be enough? And, sure, maybe there'll be a spelling mistake or two. It's not going to be the end of the world. I'm probably not going to get fired for this, or the worst case situation isn't going to happen. And that comes from that place of being able to give space to that healthy adult or foster that healthy adult and be able to put that people pleaser back in, their seat on the bus.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It just makes so much sense when you can think about it like that. And, that's awesome. So you mentioned earlier that you think we all, no matter if we're relating to people pleasing, we identify with it or we're feeling like there's a lot that's resonating, we still will have our own individual triggers or things that we might tend to do. And that part of that process of being able to become the driver of the bus and maybe have people pleaser as the passenger requires us to go through that process of identifying what they are, what those situations are, or the triggers are, so that you can kind of then recognize when it's happening and when the people pleasers trying to drive the bus have got up and they've taken over the driver for a moment. And you can put them back in their seat and say, you don't have a license. What is that? So is that what we see as, I guess it's not about just going out and doing things, like you see all the posts saying, set boundaries or do this or that. And it's like, well, that's kind of doing and some actions, and it probably means that you might start trying but not really know how to do it, but the people pleaser is still driving the bus. So you've got these boundaries you're trying to put in place, and it probably just creates some more friction, right? And you're saying the process that actually works is more starting with that identity piece and helping to shift, who you really are and what these elements of you are, and understanding them. I'm trying to paraphrase everything that you've said, which has been wonderful, but is that sort of what you're thinking, or share with me your thoughts?
Yeah, and it's a good point. And because I definitely see a lot of posts around set boundaries, say no, be yourself. And I look at those posts and I'm kind of like, okay, that's great. What you're not taking into account, though, is the way our nervous system has developed. And if we're working with a nervous system that's quite sensitive and is perceiving situations as threats that logically we know aren't threatening, we know that sitting up to 10, 11 o'clock at night is probably not going to get us fired, but we're perceiving that as a threat. We're perceiving that there's some kind of negative outcome that's going to happen. And that's based on so many of our past experiences. And our brain can't distinguish between past experiences and our current experiences. So just saying no or just setting boundaries is going to be perceived for particularly people pleasers as really difficult, really threatening. So it's important to kind of gradually work up to things like that. I mean, I'm just imagining people coming into my office and saying, oh, okay, I want to set a boundary with my mum, who I have never been able to set boundaries with because she doesn't listen to me. Whenever I express my mind, she just shuts down and tells me. And it's like, okay, well, if you're going to set a boundary with mum, that's going to really trigger your nervous system. Your nervous system is going to get really overwhelmed, and you're just going to go back into those same patterns. Because, again, those people-pleasing behaviors have served you, right? Even though they're not necessarily helpful, they've protected you in some way.
Yeah.
So to kind of, I guess, recover or to use people-pleasing as a strength, it's about kind of bringing it down, bringing it back. Like, I remember I've worked with clients where we've had conversations around, okay, you wanted a sugar in your coffee and they didn't put a sugar in your coffee. How about you start by asking them, hey, can I get a stick of sugar and put it in my own coffee? And even that has, been really difficult for some of my people-pleasing clients to work on. So you can imagine that then going up to mum and kind of starting with mum is kind of like, whoa, way too much. Being able to kind of bring it down and recognize and being able to take those little, I guess, baby steps can be really helpful, because that allows our nervous system to start piecing together that, okay, when I do start to set boundaries, or when I do start to express my needs and see that my needs are getting met by other people around, even if it's, somebody at a coffee shop, it starts to, I guess, affirm to our nervous system that we can tolerate this. It's not a threat. It's not scary. And the more of those experiences we start to get, the more that we can, I guess, kind of heal, and the more that we can then start to connect to our bodies and kind of connect to who we truly are. Because I think at the end of the day, people who are people pleasers really just want to be able to be confident, like truly confident, and not feel anxious and overwhelmed all the time, to be able to have like these really high quality relationships with their friends or their partner. But it's also difficult to do those things because they're relationships where there's that threat that's really strongly perceived as we don't want to lose those. So starting off like with kind of situations that are you've got less to lose, can be a really, really good starting point.
Yeah. Oh, I love this. And so can you describe, if you've been able to get your people pleaser out of your core identity, create it as a passenger on the bus, and you're really in control of your life, and you've still got this people pleasing element to you, but it's much more healthy now. What are some of the things that you see people, what would you see them doing, or how would you see them behaving differently now that they're sort of a bit more in control of their people pleasing and using it more to their advantage?
Yeah, gosh, there's so many examples that sprung to mind.
Yeah,
my brain just went ping, 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 ping. Like, whoa. Being able to go into a coffee shop and like little things, like they're not big things that happen for people. Like they are, but they're not, if that makes sense. Being able to walk into a coffee shop and you know, your coffee is cold and saying, actually, do you mind heating this up for me? And not kind of walking out with a cold coffee and like feeling disappointed, you know, annoyed that you've got this cold coffee. Being able to go into a meeting at work without having prepared, you know, for 3 hours the night before of what it is that you're going to say. Being able to have a difficult conversation with whether it's a friend, your partner, your boss, and know that you're not going to burst into tears because you're worried about what they might say back, because you haven't rehearsed that. You've rehearsed what you're going to say. You can't rehearse what they're going to say. So being able to just step into knowing that when you open your mouth, what you say is going to be okay, and kind of feeling more in control of your emotions around that. Gosh, there's so many examples. But I think it's also skill building as well, you know, like knowing that you do have the skills to be able to do those things. You do have the skills to be able to set those boundaries and know that even if people don't like you, you're going to be okay because you have enough knowledge in the sense that you're a good person. You're enough just as you are. Not everyone is going to necessarily want to be your friend. Not everyone is necessarily going to hire you. Not necessarily everyone is going to say yes if you ask them out on a date, and kind of being okay with that, being able to tolerate those feelings even when things don't end up going the way that you would have hoped that they would have gone.
I'm hearing as well, like when you were talking then, it's sort of like being able to handle negative feedback, or, you know, someone that maybe doesn't like what you've said or doesn't like what you, you know, even if you've got a business and a client, maybe, you know, something that they might not like, but being able to say, well, it's okay if someone has some negative feedback. That doesn't mean that I'm not any good, or it doesn't mean that the thing isn't good. That's just negative feedback, and we can work through it, or there's a solution, or hey, it doesn't matter because not everybody has to like it, right? It's you don't have to always be or say or do something that everybody likes, and it's okay to be like that. I think that's sort of the theme I was hearing there, that you can have that confidence.
Absolutely. And it's funny because you say that, because I had some negative feedback recently on an email that I sent out to a client, and because I'd accidentally sent an email. It was an error on my end, and I knew that it was an error. Admin, I always say that's not my strongest point. And would have past people pleasing me would have taken that so personally. I would have, you know, been like, well, I'm a failure at my business. This is a sign that I should shut this down. This is a sign that I'm not good enough. See, I knew that something bad was going to happen, and there's my proof. And I would have ignored all of the other positive things that have happened and really just kind of focused in on that one thing, because that would have reinforced my belief, because that people pleaser would have been on the driver's seat. And now I got that feedback and I was like, oh, whoops. Yeah, I made a mistake. Uh-oh. And I thought, okay, well, what am I going to do about this? Okay, I'm going to apologize because the error was on my end. I'm going to check my email systems and make sure that that error doesn't happen again. I'm going to look at, you know, what how that all was structured from my end to kind of, I think I already said that, make sure it doesn't happen again. And yeah, I was upset. Like there was a part of me that was like, oh yeah, that really sucks. That was a really negative experience for them. And I'm sorry about that. And I did feel sad, but it didn't weigh me down and kind of last weeks, you know, which it probably would have done in the past. And I think that that is something that is really great about being able to kind of recover from that people-pleasing side of things, is rather than having that ongoing fear that when somebody says something that is, like you said, negative, it doesn't draw you down into your own sense of self-worth. You can, again, it's kind of that separating of that part and recognizing that as a whole person, you're still okay. So yeah, kind of reflecting on, and that's, again, coming back to why I do this work, is because I've been through this. I know what it's like to be in that people-pleasing space.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there's something different on the other side. I know that it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be a life full of anxiety and overwhelm and dread and fearing what other people think of you all the time. You can truly be confident and feel good about yourself and your relationships and work and life, whilst also still being a good person who makes mistakes.
Yeah. And just being like, that's okay. We can move on from it, and it's not a disaster. That's amazing. I really see and hear the empowerment, that comes through, like, while, you still want to and do what you can to provide a good experience, but it's not detrimental to you. It's in alignment with you. And I think that's a real shift, isn't it? From it being out of alignment with yourself and putting yourself last, to it being, this is something I want to provide a good experience. I want them to be pleased. And hey, if something goes wrong, it's not the end of the world. We can move on from it. And removing yourself from that place where the mistake, it wasn't about you, it's just a mistake, and mistakes happen. It's really good. I love that. So if anybody's thinking, I'd love to know some more, Eloise, and they're thinking, they maybe are identifying right now as a people pleaser, thinking, I'd love to just understand a bit more about it. How could they reach out to you? Where do you hang out on your socials? What's the best place?
Well, my socials definitely don't tell people what they're doing wrong. But you can definitely check me out on Insta, which I'm guessing will be in your show notes.
Yep.
And my favorite resource that I have is my Badass Blueprint, which really helps people step into being able to communicate with others in really clear and healthy ways. And I've had such amazing feedback on that resource. It's great. And the other thing that I am in the process of launching is my She series, which is an online membership for women who do identify as people pleasers and want to connect with a community of women who are all on the same page and are all looking to support each other throughout that journey, because I'm very passionate about the whole concept of women coming together to help each other collectively heal from all of the conditioning that we've been exposed to in a safe and supportive environment. So yeah, if that sounds like something that you're interested in, feel free to check me out on www.thesheseries.com.
Excellent. I'll make sure that is in the show notes. That sounds like such an amazing space that you've created for people, to come together and sort of feel like you're not the only one who has those thoughts, and it's not a crazy voice. It's actually really normal. And there's also some really cool things that we can do to feel more confident and more empowered in your life, which I'm sure we can, pretty much all of us can do with more of, can't we? And without losing ourselves. Like, it's not like we're going to change our personality or change who we are. We can just actually become the driver on the bus. I love that. That's like totally stuck in my head, your analogy of the driver on the bus. I'm like, yep, I'm going to be the bus driver, and that little people pleaser part of me is really lovely, and they're a passenger on the bus, but they're not making all the decisions. So I love it, Eloise. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time with me here today. This has been a really awesome chat. Learned a lot myself, and I appreciate you taking the time to hang out.
Thanks so much for having me, Jess. It was awesome to have a chat with you. This is totally my jam, and I love talking about it. So really appreciate you having me on your show.
Oh, that's amazing. Thanks, Eloise, and we'll talk soon. Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of She's a Business podcast. I hope that you've been enjoying it as much as I have in creating the content to bring to you. So I really appreciate you being here. I appreciate your presence and your attention. Now, if you love the podcast, or maybe you just loved today's episode, then I would absolutely appreciate it if you would go to Apple Podcasts, scroll down, hit the 5 stars, and then leave me a short review about what it was that you really enjoyed in this episode, or maybe in the podcast overall. And when I receive those reviews, then I love to give those reviewers a shout out on my future podcast episodes. So you never know, you may hear your name getting a shout out in a future episode if you do that. So thank you once again for your time, and I'll see you next time on She's the Business.